All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Bleacher Report. I'm Mike Golick Jr., and this is college football week 1 overreactions. Excited to take a look back at an incredible opening slate that we had for the sport this weekend. 3 top 10 matchups, all of which came down to one-possession games, and plenty of great stuff that we'll get into. So we'll toss out some overreactions, see where we stand on that. As always, we want to hear from you in the chat, whether you're listening or watching on the Bleacher Report app, on YouTube. We'll hear from you. I will be minding the chat as we go along here to see any questions that you might have about college football along the way. Although, listen, as we go through this, I've been covering this sport now for a decade. I was a former college football player at Notre Dame. I was an offensive lineman there from 2008 to 2012. If you watch the Big 12 on TNT, you'll see me there commentating games with the likes of J.B. Long, Allie LaForce, and Coy Wire as we go through the conference this year. So I feel like I've been around the sport enough to have a good opinion on all of this. But a tip of the cap to one of the best to ever do it this weekend. The great Lee Corso had his final headgear pick on College Game Day this weekend. And in the process of receiving flowers from folks across the industry, I saw Big Noon Kickoff manage to go and actually cut into that final headgear pick, the respect and admiration everyone has. But Lee Corso went undefeated. Perfect 6 for 6 on the weekend with all his picks, including being the only man to pick Florida State to topple Alabama on that desk. So Coach Corso getting some well-deserved rest now. The man's 90 years old. He has been an integral part of my Saturdays for my entire life, watching, being a part of, and then covering college football. So no one's earned the rest more, but man, showing you on the way out, he's still got the fastball. Coach Corso, not so fast, my friend. Everyone check out this work. So congrats to him. It was an awesome moment. I shed a couple of tears in the hotel room in Tucson, Arizona, getting ready for this weekend, and Coach Corso going out in style as only he deserves for all the great work he's done on behalf of the sport. All right, let's get to some week 1 overreactions. And there is no other place that we can start in this sport besides Texas and Arch Manning. So Texas went on the road, number 1 versus number 3, the defending champion Ohio State Buckeyes. And what we saw, if you're a Texas fan, unfortunately, was not the Arch Manning that everyone was sold in the preseason. So the overreaction here is it time to toss Arch Manning's Heisman ticket already? The guy who at most sports books was the odds-on favorite going into week 1, and now is toppled to, I think, the 6th or 7th best odds, depending on which book you're looking at here. You see the stats. 170 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, just 5.7 yards per attempt during the course of this game. And unfortunately for Arch, I think just the victim of otherworldly expectations. Do I agree with this overreaction? Absolutely not. Quite honestly, you may be able to get better odds for a guy that I do think is going to improve as the season goes along, is going to be on a team with Steve Sarkisian and the rest of the offense around him that actually went out and played some pretty clean football, if not with some conservative play calling. I think the directive was pretty clear for Steve Sarkisian and Texas. They wanted to go out here and have Arch Manning drive with 10-2. Hands up, both hands on the wheel, trying to conduct this offense that had him under center a lot, that made use of a lot of play action stuff. I know friends of mine, like former colleague Dan Orlovsky, lamented the training wheels put on this offense for a guy that Dan considers a generational quarterback talent. I saw a guy that was gripping the bat a little bit too tight, to use a baseball term. There had been so much pressure put on this dude, people acting like he's the next Tim Tebow already before he'd played real meaningful snaps. We know that he had 2 starts last year while Quinn Ewers was injured, but you saw some of the throws that were short-hopped. The last throw on the final 2-minute drive where Texas, for all that we're going to talk about with this, still had a chance to win this game at the end. And Arch Manning has a great look at a wide receiver coming streaking from his left to right and throws a ball without his feet really set, a bit sidearm that ultimately lands behind the receiver and is part of why they walk out of there with that loss. I think most of what we saw with Arch is correctable. And quite honestly, them losing this game now and a little bit of the wind coming out of the sails could be the best thing for him in the long term. Again, I think there was a lot of pressure that built up on that young man, and there were different spots where I think we saw it manifest on the field. And so I am not going to sell on this just yet. I think having him as the favorite to start the season was way too rich for my blood, especially with some of the other quarterbacks that we're going to talk about coming up in just a little bit. Cough, cough, Garrett Nussmeier and LSU. But I think him still being a quarterback that I would count on with the talent around him, the play caller and Steve Sarkisian, and the opportunities that Texas is going to have in the SEC playing big-time games this year, I wouldn't count him out of the race necessarily, but he shouldn't have been leading it to begin with. That was what we did. That had nothing to do with what Arch Manning did. That was what we did as a football-watching public, and unfortunately, he had to deal with that on that Saturday game against an Ohio State team that, oh, by the way, in the midst of all this, looked pretty darn good defending their national championship, went out there. Julian Sand, who had been treated like chopped liver all in the lead up to this game, a former five-star himself who wasn't asked to go out there and move heaven and earth, but Matt Patricia's defense, his first year coordinating here back in the college ranks, for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, went out and put together a really impressive game plan to go and prevent any of the big plays that were going to happen and give some of those great athletes up front for Ohio State a chance to turn it loose and go and stifle Arch Manning's debut. So that overreaction, I think, is more of an us problem than an Arch Manning problem. I think he's going to be fine this season here. Let's get to number 2. This one is personal for me. So I mentioned I'm a former Notre Dame offensive lineman. I was there 2008 to 2012. The Notre Dame-Miami rivalry is an interesting one to consider in the history of college football. Most of those games happened from the start of the 1970s through the beginning of the 1990s. And then there's a huge gap where I was born, 1989. We didn't play them until my junior year at Notre Dame. We played them in the 2010 Sun Bowl in El Paso, Texas, and won there. We played them in 2012, my fifth-year senior year, at Soldier Field in Chicago and beat the brakes off them in that game. And then they played a very forgettable game in 2016. And then the one most people remember recently, 2017, Notre Dame, Miami, both top 10 ranked. Miami goes in, or Notre Dame goes down to Miami and gets absolutely run out of the building. And this one looked like it could be going that way again. And then Notre Dame was able to claw their way back in. Miami gets a 27-24 win over Notre Dame, who started the season as a top 10 team, both of them here. Carson Beck, the veteran, comes over, just over 200 yards passing. A very conservative game plan for Miami overall. Big plays made. C.J. Daniels, maybe the catch of the weekend for them going into the half to get points on the board as they win the middle 8. And C.J. Carr, Notre Dame's freshman quarterback, redshirt freshman, who spent last year in the quarterback room behind Riley Leonard, throws for 221 and 2 touchdowns, rushes for another touchdown, and I thought looked composed. The story of this game was the physicality of Miami on the offensive and defensive lines. Not gaudy rushing stats, but for Carson Beck, the key numbers. Only 1 sack in this game. Boubacar Traore managed to get home once, but other than that, Carson Beck had a lot of time to sit back and pick it off. Miami was able to have good rush efficiency, long time-chewing drives, including the first drive to start the second half that took almost half the third quarter off the clock by the time Notre Dame saw the football back and was down a couple of scores. I'll give the Irish credit. They've got a lot to build on. We can talk about them later. But the overreaction here is, should Miami and could Miami win the ACC? Should they be the favorites in a weekend where we also saw the Clemson Tigers lose, Florida State upset Alabama, which we'll get to? And while I don't think they would be Miami wins the ACC, yes or no? I'll say right now, yes. Coming off this first weekend, I think Miami should be the favorite to win the ACC. They're built to the right stuff, and especially Clemson, who was handed what most people thought would be the ACC before the season. They take a step back against LSU. I look at what that matchup entails, and it's got to be one in the trenches. Clemson brought back a veteran offensive line that really wasn't given much chance to run the ball, but only 31 or 33 rushing yards in their loss to LSU. And then defensively, we've heard all the names, Peter Woods and company, the top 15 draft picks they have on that side of the ball. You've got to be able to win in the trenches. And the one thing you come away from Miami's win over Notre Dame, realizing Mario Cristobal, former offensive lineman himself, Alex Maribal, one of the best offensive line coaches in college football, have done a phenomenal job molding that unit into a wall of humanity. They are high-priced, high-paid, and incredibly heavy recruits up front that went out there and just were able to move Notre Dame off the football. And so I think that gives them a great chance matched up against Clemson, Florida State in the mix as well. But I'm going to give Miami the edge, one of the more impressive opening weekend wins. And Notre Dame clawed their way back in. Miami able to go down the penultimate drive of the game where they take a field goal lead and eat a bunch of time off the clock, protect Carson Beck there, get a couple of well-timed runs that it mattered. I came away really impressed with what they built. And obviously defensively, Ruben Bain, Akeem Mesidor, both shutting the door on that game in the final drive. Notre Dame has about a minute left, no timeouts to drive the field. And the way C.J. Carr played, you thought had a chance. Those two defensive linemen and freaks of nature thought otherwise. Both guys that I think could do a really good job on the next level, and did against Notre Dame's tackles. 2 sacks to end that game. The time expires before Notre Dame even has a chance to get their final snap off. So overreaction, yeah, I think Miami winning the ACC is absolutely one I would co-sign after that one game. Let's get to this. I saw this take pop up a bunch across the ESPN family of networks. I think Heather Dinich, ton of respect for her, phenomenal college football reporter. She was one of the first people I saw that said LSU should be number 1. And I think LSU, for me, here we go. So there's the quote. LSU had the best win of week 1. They beat a team capable of competing for the national title, and that's why she should put it up there. If you were going to ask me to do a power ranking after week 1, I might agree with this. Let's put it this way. They absolutely have what it takes to be the number 1 team in college football. They have the talent, and now they have the defense. And to me, that was the biggest difference. LSU's defense and the way they showed up against Clemson on the road in Clemson's Death Valley was incredible. One of the best linebacking cores in football, where you've got both Weeks brothers, Wet and Wist, Witt and West. Wow, I just swapped those in a way that's wild. Ohio State, not a top 10 offense in the chat. Disagree with that. We'll get back to Ohio State in a little bit when we wrap this up. But LSU as the number 1 team. So I mentioned Witt Weeks and West Weeks in that linebacking room, joined by Harold Perkins, who now sits in that star role and finally seems to have found the home that college football has been hoping he would for the last few years. I thought he was sensational. The last play of the game, really emblematic for that, a play called to basically take the whole LSU D-line one way, loop Harold Perkins around the other way, and have him flush out and stymie Cade Klubnik outside the pocket where they had known he was going to go all game long. That group can run with anybody. Mansour Delane at cornerback number 4, stuck like glue to every Clemson receiver he was paired up with. He had one of the most sensational performances of the day. But then D lineman Bernard Gooden. And these are all guys, especially Mansour and Gooden, transfer players, part of the class that LSU brought in here to fix the defense last year that, in a lot of people's mind, continued to cost this team. I thought they looked sensational. Up front, Gooden was borderline unblockable, incredible lateral quickness, showed up in the backfield a lot against Clemson, was able to harass Cade Klubnik in that group. And Mansour Delane, again, stuck like glue in the back end. But that linebacker group, to me, looks like it could be the best in college football. They were everywhere. They were fooled by nothing. You got 2 brothers there, so the communication is already going to be A1. But then Harold Perkins, who on his best day has looked like one of the most exciting players in college football, but was kind of a tweener. When Brian Kelly and the staff came over, we had watched him rush the passer early in his career. They put him an off-ball linebacker in the middle, and him taking on blocks, not really something he wanted to do or necessarily was equipped to do. But now as he sits here opposite 2 guys willing to go do the dirty work, I think we have a chance to see the best of Harold Perkins. And LSU absolutely has a claim to being the best team in college football. Eric Midget in the chat says, it's sad how ND lost. I agree. I absolutely agree. And Iron 93, Heather's comment doesn't more directly apply to OSU after their win. I think that's really the question right here is, does Ohio State deserve to be number 1 after going and beating the number 1 team? Now, it was a home game, which we have to factor in here. LSU played on the road and beat a top 10 Clemson team, as we know. But I do think Ohio State probably gets the benefit of the doubt when we look at the polls this week. I think they're going to be the number 1 team. We'll get to that in a little bit here and look ahead at the top 25. Hot mic user, because she works at ESPN, all they do is ride for the SEC. I'm going to give Heather Dinich a lot more credit than that. She is a consummate professional, one of my former teammates there. I understand a lot of people look at the networks and look at the conference affiliations, but I also think LSU, to me, we'll get to who sent the biggest message this week. I think LSU's defense was the story of the weekend in terms of the single unit that surprised me the most with their performance. I absolutely think it was that. That looked like it could be one of the best defenses in college football. They were aggressive. They got downhill. I have nothing but positive things to say about that group, and I'm excited to see if they can follow it up and string them together for a huge year for Brian Kelly down in Baton Rouge. Came down there with national championships on his mind after a tenure at Notre Dame, where that was basically the only thing he didn't have. And so we'll wait and see if he can grab to that. But this one, Not an overreaction. We will get to Hot Mic User, my new top 5, in just a little bit when we get through the rest of these week 1 overreactions. I promise you, chat, so we will have that coming in just a little bit. Mind you, the AP poll comes out Tuesday, so we won't know till then, but we will keep that in mind. Let's get to the biggest upset of the weekend. This overreaction. Alabama can't be saved. They lose to Florida State, a team that was 2-10 last season. Alabama, coming off college football last year as the biggest lightning rod team in the sport, the face that launched 1,000 ships. Alabama being left out of the playoff prompted an offseason full of discourse, the likes of which we hadn't seen since last offseason, quite honestly, when we do this every year. But Alabama being left off mounted the SEC talking about strength of schedule, the metrics used by the College Football Playoff Committee. Will we expand and do this away altogether? And they followed that up by getting beat by 2 touchdowns by a Florida State team that people weren't sure about going into the season. And Thomas Castellanos, their quarterback, came out and talked his talk, said Nick Saban's not here to save them anymore. And so he came out in this game and had over 250 yards of total offense by himself. You see it right there. Only had to pass it 14 times, but rushed 16 times for 78 yards, had a touchdown here. And when you say that, we all had the same reaction this offseason, right? Alabama's going to pluck the wings off him after that. You don't want to feed the Alabama machine that was always under Nick Saban looking for that extra chip to manufacture on their shoulder, even when they were one of the best teams in the sport. And Thomas Castellanos gave it to him willingly. And when got asked about it before the season, doubled down and said, I wanted my teammates to know how much confidence I had in them. I wanted everyone to know that we believe we can go out here and win this game. And that belief goes a long way when you're looking at that script A on the side of helmets. Like, that respect that they come into every season with matters, but it feels like we had a change this weekend. Last year was already a change. We know it was year 1 without Nick Saban. And even at the end of Nick Saban's tenure, it felt like things were getting a little bit different. And you see right here, Nick Saban and Kalen DeBoer both lost 4 games against unranked opponents as the head coach of Bama. It took Kalen DeBoer 14 games. It took Nick Saban 230 games. And so much of this beginning a weekend of college football is about the standard. What standard we held each team to based on what we saw last. The standard that people put in place for Arch Manning that was unearned. There had been nothing that Arch Manning had done to earn all of the praise coming into him on the season. Obviously, his high school career, things like that, but we were way over our skis with that. And his performance went out there and fell well below the bar that everyone had set because the bar was in a place that he was never going to reach. Notre Dame's standard. I was guilty of that, thinking, hey, they would walk back in so many of the same parts from a defense that was great through a playoff run last year. New coordinator, new year, coming off training camp where they haven't hit a different color jersey in a while. And it looked different than that. And so people in South Bend are kind of freaking out about what they saw there. But in Alabama, that standard that you saw from Nick Saban is probably in the most unreachable place humanly possible. No one's ever going to do what Nick Saban did again. That's the best college football coach in the history of the sport. And what he did there, following that guy, is an unenviable task. And I was one of the camp, covering Kalen DeBoer, seeing the work he did at Washington, seeing the work that he did at Fresno State before that, all these different things. Like, Kalen DeBoer has been a successful coach everywhere that he has been. But this is a different animal entirely. And now, as we look at this and we see people in the chat already saying, oh, they got to get a new coach, they got to do that. That fire is going to rise for Kalen DeBoer right now. It's going to be a real test for him and everyone in his circle of how they can go out here and manage this, because this kind of pressure is different than anything he's felt anywhere else. Again, was successful at Sioux Falls in various roles, including head coach, was successful at Fresno State, was successful in his season in Indiana as the offensive coordinator. Fresno State is the head coach. Washington, getting them to the college football playoff and the national championship. But this is different. And the thing that was most surprising about that game, we're in the portal era. We're going to have to get more and more used to teams being able to reinvent themselves almost completely year over year, the way it seems like Florida State may be able to do. But Alabama got pushed around in a way that's atypical. The Alabama linebacker core got pushed around, looked confused in a way that's atypical, especially under the Saban era, where I played against Alabama in the 2012 BCS national title game. C.J. Mosley was their linebacker. He had an answer for everything. That position in Nick Saban's defense to go along with like the safeties and the defensive back group that we know Nick worked with closely, that to me was always the most prepared group on the field. And getting over on them schematically in preparation was something that almost never happened, and it looked like that's what happened in this game. Give credit to Florida State. Gus Malzahn comes over after being a head coach at UCF, a lot like what we saw for Chip Kelly, leaving the head coaching job at UCLA to go be the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. What a coup that was for them. And now you get Gus Malzahn going and doing the same thing, a guy with tons of familiarity with the SEC, tons of familiarity with Alabama, and he went out there and he coached a fearless team. He had a fearless quarterback, and he had really a quarterback that was the archetype for what we've seen beat even Saban teams in the past, right? When Nick Saban's teams got beat, it was almost always a maverick quarterback who could use his legs to hurt the opposing teams. Swag Kelly, Johnny Manziel, on down the list. Like these guys that are able to buy time and hurt you with their legs, and who also come in with that sort of fearless attitude. So it's not like we didn't see that happen to Nick Saban before, but it's never happened this frequently. And for it to happen week one, we're right, wrong, or indifferent when we've got games like this, where there's no NFL going on and there's more eyes on this than ever, this is the kind of stuff that sticks to the ribs. And all of a sudden now, I likened it this morning talking to someone, this feels very like 300-esque. They throw the spear at Xerxes and made the God King bleed. Alabama's going to have to work real hard to go and reset this idea that now they're vulnerable. Coming off of last year and then leading off with this, they are not going to walk in with that same level of respect and intimidation into opposing stadiums because people have watched them get beat, have watched them get out physical now. A lot of people talking about players not running to the ball on defense, all things that just never happened in the Nick Saban era of Alabama. So I don't think that Alabama is beyond saving. I think Kalen DeBoer is a good coach. I think Ty Simpson, live arm, like of some of the quarterbacks that made their starts, he's the one with the most pop to it, but just could never get in sync. That offensive line struggled with protection, especially when you got into the second half against the Florida State defensive front that's got good players, but I don't necessarily think has one dynamic world beater on the edge that I thought would give them this kind of trouble. So that's an overreaction for me. I don't think they're beyond saving. And we know the buyout stuff. I think Kalen DeBoer can right the ship, but it's a different era. And college football overall, when we talk about the parity in the sport, a lot of that just has to do with the fact that, hey, Nick Saban doesn't live there anymore. And Kalen DeBoer can be a very good coach and still not be Nick Saban in Tuscaloosa. I don't know what that yet means. We've seen in the past, they put a brick through Bill Curry's windshield before. Crazy things can happen, and that shouldn't happen. I hope fans respond with a little more, sense than that. But Brandon, not to mention that Grubb had Simpson throwing hospital balls to Ryan Williams all game. Listen, I still think the Ryan Grubb return to Tuscaloosa and the return to Kalen DeBoer, for anyone unfamiliar, Ryan Grubb was one of the coaches that had been with Kalen DeBoer basically through the entire ride. And then last year, his first year down here, gets the offensive coordinator job for the Seattle Seahawks, leaves for that for a year under Mike McDonald, and things don't go great there. He gets run out of town and replaced by Clint Kubiak and comes back to Kalen DeBoer. And I thought, all right, Kalen DeBoer had been in a new place trying to come in here and follow Nick Saban, and now all of a sudden he's got his guy back. He's got someone that he's comfortable with, working and calling the offense, going through the game plan with. Surely this can mean some good things there, and so far yet it didn't pay off. I understand. And the Ryan Williams experience, by the way, going back to last year, Ryan Williams mentioned in lockstep with Jeremiah Smith as these great young players. Did you hear Ryan Williams was 17 last year? Yes, very aware. But outside of one big game, Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith did not have comparable years. Jeremiah Smith was the best wide receiver in college football last year, and Ryan Smith was incredibly talented and had big spurts, but it wasn't consistent. We could talk about Jalen Milroe, the quarterback, obviously, who was an imperfect passer, albeit experienced and incredibly dynamic runner. And now Ty Simpson, not super experienced, and he's in a new regime play calling wise. So I think we've got to give this all a little bit of time. That's the unsexy answer for a lot of what happened week one is it's a one game sample size. But there's a lot of newness. And for Alabama, a new quarterback that's had to wait around for a little while. Do we find out that there's a reason why he had to wait that long? I don't know. I'm not willing to put the knife in him after week one because I trust the ingredients involved. But this looks different than it has in a while, and it makes Alabama vulnerable in a way that we haven't seen for quite some time. In the chat on YouTube, Marquis says, Bama defense put in no effort. I think that's going to be the one thing that probably is the toughest to swallow and should get called out first. I saw Dan Orlovsky posted something like he saw 20, 21 loafs in that game, guys not running to the ball, guys not giving max effort. That's the stuff that's inexcusable. And that's the stuff that most people would point to as like, hey, that wouldn't happen under the iron fist of Nick Saban. And Kalen's not Nick personality-wise. He shouldn't be. Coming in and trying to do your best impression of Nick Saban, not going to be a way to do this. CD said, please bring back the portal. Brother, it's already there. Williams to Georgia if he's smart. We'll see. Going to be really interesting to see how Alabama navigates this. They've still been one of the team's best recruiting classes, the depth of talent. They've got all the things that it takes, but they've got to work it out here. Let's get to this one. I think this is fascinating. Everyone loves talking Deion Sanders anyway. Colorado in week one. Colorado is doomed is the take. So Caden Salter gets the start. Julian Lewis was the five-star incoming freshman, but Caden Salter, who had been a multi-year starter at Liberty, incredibly productive here, goes out, and they lose a barn burner on Friday night to Georgia Tech. Haynes King runs for 1 billion yards in Brent Key's offense. That's the spread option that'll absolutely eat you alive. Jamal Haynes and Haynes King in that backfield, speed to burn, everything going every which way. Give Colorado's defense credit. For a while, they were able to hold. They made a lot of improvement last year. But this game, I think, comes all the way down to what we saw at the end of the game. So, Colorado's down 20-27. They've got 1:07 left in the game and 2 timeouts. They proceed to run 6 plays in that time and keep both timeouts under their belt. Deion Sanders said after the game, hey, I know I've got those 2 timeouts in my pocket. I don't want to take them with me, but you also want to be strategic about this. I'm not going to do it just so I don't get harassed by the media. You want to use them at the right time. Mentioned that they were able to stop the clock a couple of times. Could have with the first down on 3rd and short. So here's the sequence. Colorado gets the opening kickoff touchback, or the kickoff at that point touchback. Colorado takes their first snap, about a minute left. Caden Salter throws a pass that's basically a swing pass for 2 yards. Time bleeds off the clock. Next snap comes and goes, we're getting under the 40-second mark now. Caden Salter completes another pass for 11 yards to the Colorado 34. Now it's 3rd and 1. There's 28 seconds left on the clock. This is the spot where I had the biggest disagreement. Because we heard from Deion Sanders, oh, well, we just needed 1 yard to get a first down, and that would stop the clock. And Caden Salter ends up getting that 1 yard, but inexplicably goes and runs an extra 10 yards sideways to try and get out of bounds, which stops the clock, but also bleeds off another, 10 seconds in that play. If you're about the yard, and that part's execution on the quarterback, he's a veteran player. I don't think he should have been put in that position. I'll tell you what should have happened. But he goes and does that and stops the clock, but they lose a bunch of that time in getting the first down, where under 2 minutes, if he gets the first down, that stops the clock, and they can either get up and spike it or have another play. What should have happened is, 1, I didn't like the first play call to begin with, that swing pass, but 2, after you throw that pass and it's 3rd and 1, it's in the middle of the field, so the clock's running. You bang the timeout there. You go over to the sideline and you get 2 plays ready to go. Say, all right, 3rd and 1 here, we can get this one and stop the clock. That way, everything's on the menu. You can throw a quick pass. You can run it up the middle. And then immediately after that, you've got that second play ready to go. And depending on how far it is, if all of a sudden you hit a big one and go up, now you go up there, get up to there, it's going to stop, spike the ball, and then you can work. If you're on the other side of the 50-yard line, then you've got 1 timeout and you're good to go. But the coaching staff let the players down, in my mind, on that decision. Deion Sanders is a great coach. We've seen what he's been able to do at multiple stops now from Jackson State to Colorado and the improvement made here. But the staff has to wear this one. There's no crime in saying that. I disagreed with the way they managed the clock there, and I did not think it put their players in the best chance to win. Do I think they're doomed? No. I think there was still plenty of good in this game. I think Georgia Tech could be a very live dog in the ACC this year. I think a team that can block that well up front the way a Brent Key coach team always will, and that has that much speed in the backfield across the board, they're going to be a tough out for everyone. And God forbid the passing attack really comes online. People are in for some trouble. But that was a good team to face week one, and Colorado had a chance to win that game, so it's by no means beyond saving. They've got a veteran quarterback who's played a ton of high-level football there, a defense that I thought overall improved last year, a line of scrimmage on offense that I think's gotten better. But it was poor decision-making, and that's got to fall on the head coach in Deion Sanders. So I don't think they're doomed, but I certainly think that was poor decision-making by the staff in that moment, compounded by a poor play by a veteran quarterback who I think should have known better in that moment. And that's how you end up with a couple shots. They still had a chance at the end zone. They had a good ball that made it all the way over there, but unfortunately not enough to win it. So do I think Colorado is doomed? No, but that clock management, and JB points out in the YouTube chat, clock management has been an issue since Deion came to Colorado. And that's the stuff you got to see. Like, that came up in other games, right? Mario Cristobal, who's some noted gaffes in clock management, burned 2 timeouts early in that Notre Dame game. Their team comes out and starts the second half with a delay of game penalty. Like, those things matter in the long run for teams that, Miami's expected to do things this season and win the ACC. That's stuff you worry about in the long run. And certainly for Colorado, who's trying to stick the dismount coming off of the era of Shedeur Sanders, of Travis Hunter, and show this next iteration. A lot of people didn't think Deion Sanders was still going to be here coaching. Cook Jay says Sanders hasn't proven anything coaching. I disagree. Like, what he's already done at Colorado has been pretty exemplary. What he did at Jackson State before that, pretty exemplary. Like, hey, you can beef with somehow how he does it, his approach to recruiting, things like that, but I don't know, man. You look at this Colorado team and go back to last year. To be able to go out and win, 9 games last season? Ultimately losing the bowl game, but them's the breaks. I don't know what he inherited in that program and how quickly they were able to turn this around. I didn't always agree with how it went down, but I don't think you could say he hasn't proven anything. I think Deion Sanders has shown us a heck of a lot already, but again, it doesn't make him infallible. Mess up. Nick Saban messed up before, and you just got to own it. And I also think, as a former player, a coach owning a mistake like that in front of the team goes a long way. If your coach shows that level of accountability, that's something that's pervasive and trickles down to the rest of the locker room. So I do think it's important for a player to hear that from a coach, hey, we've got to do better. And if Deion doesn't want to say that to the media, that's fine. Like, Deion's relationship to the media is what it is. I don't care about that. It's what he says to those young men behind closed doors about that moment, to me, that I do think is important coming off this situation. All right, last overreaction here from week 1 in college football. I'm Mike Golick Jr. here. Thank you for tapping into the BR app and overreacting on a Monday with us. Tennessee was right. So this one, if you weren't around for one of the biggest offseason storylines that we had, Nico Iamaleava was the quarterback for the Tennessee Vols. He was a highly prized 5-star recruit coming out of high school. He had a chance to start a bowl game against Iowa a year ago and then take over as the full-time starter last year. Josh Heupel's offense seemed perfect for him. Live arm, mobile quarterback, all stuff that works really well in the spread hurry-up version of that offense that Josh runs at Tennessee. And we'd seen when Hendon Hooker had great success and you can throw the deep ball and you have a quarterback that can run, you've got a team that could be the top team in football and challenge for a lot of important things in the SEC and the college football playoff. Was an up-and-down year for Nico last year. And going into this offseason, we get to spring football all of a sudden, and we hear reports that Nico Iamaleava wants a raise. In college football right now, the contracts aren't as ironclad as the NFL. You can kind of go and renegotiate every year. It's a bit of free agency. And Tennessee says, no, we're good. They stand their ground, and so Nico Iamaleava transfers. We hear different sides of this from everyone involved, but what it sounds like is the player valued himself at one number, thought he had the edge because it's spring ball. Tennessee's not going to go into this season without a quarterback, without someone that's proven under center. That'd be a big risk for them in this day and age. They hold pat. They've got a number in their head that they believe is right, and away we go. So while that had been going on, Joey Aguilar had transferred to UCLA. Nico announces that he's going to UCLA, and so Joey Aguilar says, well, bleep that. I'll go to Tennessee. So they basically wife swap. Joey Aguilar goes to Tennessee. Nico Iamaleava goes to UCLA. And the rest is history. Week 1 of the season, Tennessee taking on the Syracuse Orange. Good matchup. Syracuse, Fran Brown had a good season last year. Kyle McCord did really well. And you see right here, Joey Aguilar goes out there and lights it up. 3 touchdowns, no interception. Did lose a fumble in that game at 247, almost 250 yards passing. It looked like exactly what this offense needed. On the other side, Nico Iamaleava went up against a Utah team that I think is going to win the Big 12 this year. 126 yards, 50% completion, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. And you saw balls that got airmailed, easy layups that weren't made by a quarterback that's too talented to make those mistakes. I'll say this. Tennessee, I think, was right in the sense that in this day and age, with GMs now, with essentially a salary cap, even if it's slightly unlimited, still in the wake of the House settlement, you have to have a value on each player. What these college front offices now are doing, these general managers you see put in place, they've got a scouting department for high school players like you used to have. They've got a scouting department for college players. And their job is to look around their roster and say, what's the going rate at these positions? And do we think the guys that we have there at premium positions are worth enough to us to go over that? Or do we have to stand our ground in the name of constructing the entirety of our roster? And Tennessee decided, hey, we value Nico at a number and we're not going to go past that. And we believe our coach, the system, the environment around here can take someone else in short notice and get it done. It's a long season, but Joey Aguilar made him right in week 1. I'll say that. It looks like they were right to stand their ground on this one. And this is the kind of cautionary tale that I thought was always going to be a part of the portal experience in college football. Now, players, the pendulum swung wildly one way, where now players had a ton of power, freedom of movement, freedom to go in and negotiate, and especially at quarterback. You're a valuable commodity in this sport because there just aren't a ton of great ones walking in college. Cook J says, I agree, Tennessee was correct. Great coach. Josh Heupel has shown he's a damn good ball coach. And that's been a team been defined by defense, offensive line, a running game. And again, when Hendon Hooker was there, you felt like the quarterback all of a sudden elevated what they were doing around the rest of that roster. Nico on the other side, there were mistakes, but there were also some plays where it was like, okay, that's what you brought him here for. The real big difference is I don't think UCLA's defense is going to be able to hold up much this season. Now, Utah's offense, Devin Dampier, if you don't know the name, get to know it. Transfer quarterback from New Mexico. Him and Jason Beck, their offensive coordinator, came from New Mexico together to Utah, and I think you're going to give Kyle Whittingham a hell of a season here opposite a defense that is the usual standard. Utah's going to have great linebackers and defensive linemen. They're going to play single high man coverage, and they're going to try and bully you. And Utah was able to do that in this game. Made Nico uncomfortable, but on the other side, they ran roughshod over that UCLA defense. They tuned them up. So I do think Tennessee made the right call on this one. I'm always super pro player. I want to see Nico go out here and succeed, but I think you've also got to have self-awareness because Nico was not a player last year that I thought should be able to come in and hold an organization hostage if that is indeed what happened. If there was just a disagreement on price, that's also going to be part of this day and age. It's the double-edged sword of a world where players can get paid the way they are getting paid now. I love to see it for these guys. I think they absolutely have deserved a piece of the pie. This revenue share is long overdue. But Tennessee gets the win in week 1, and they get to say that they were right. So those are our overreactions in week 1. Obviously, hit us with yours in the chat. JB says Nico is an elite volleyball player, but an average quarterback with potential. At this point, that's probably still the case. He has more potential and gifts than he is a high-functioning Division I college quarterback. Elijah W., as a Texas fan, I'm highly disappointed in the Texas offense. That was also a really hostile environment going up against an NFL defensive coordinator with a bunch of really quality players still. Ohio State lost a bunch of guys to the NFL. That 2021 class, led by JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer and company, one of the most game-changing groups in Ohio State history, and delivered them a championship that's going to get talked about a lot there in a while. But they're not new to this. They're true to this. They're one of the programs where they continue to reload every year. That was a tough environment to make your first start in. And again, just way too much pressure put on Arch Manning by everybody else up until this point. So I can understand the disappointment if you're a Texas fan, but I think that's going to get a lot better. The reason why I think Kyle Flood, their offensive line coach, does a phenomenal job. And I thought that group played clean football up front of the offensive line. Moved people, weren't out of place. You didn't see a bunch of MAs and things like that. They lost a bunch of guys to the NFL last year, including Kelvin Banks Jr., who was a first-round draft pick by the New Orleans Saints. I think they've reloaded nicely, and I think if that group in front of them can continue to protect, the stuff with Arch Manning is, in my mind, correctable. And hopefully now he gets to exhale. He got that out of the way. They lost. The expectations are going to drop a little bit in the meantime. He's still Arch Manning, so people are still going to talk about him, but it's going to, I think, let some of the air out of the balloon in a way that's healthy for everybody. All right, with that in mind, so we did have 3 top 10 matchups this week. Let's take a look at week 2 predictions. I should say, by the way, we're not done with week 1. North Carolina and TCU play tonight. I'll give you the prediction for that one. I have no earthly idea what North Carolina is going to do. Transfer quarterback coming in. Bill Belichick coming in from the first time ever coaching in college after being the greatest NFL coach in history against the TCU team that, God help Sonny Dykes and company, cannot help but wind up in the game that is going to be the most polarizing at the start of every season. 2 years ago, coming off their national championship appearance and lost to Georgia, they get Deion Sanders and the Colorado Buffaloes in a game that Colorado wins and launches all of the discourse about that team. And now they get Bill Belichick rolling in frosty off an offseason where everyone wanted to talk about his girlfriend. And we learned more about that man than we did in 2 decades in New England at the helm of the Patriots. So I'll be tuned in and strapped in for that one tonight. It's going to be a really interesting end to the first week. TCU, by the way, Josh Hoover, returning starter at quarterback in the Big 12, where 9 starting quarterbacks returned who threw for 2,400 or more yards last season. Josh Hoover among them. So really good player. Sonny Dykes replacing some important players on that offense as well. Going to be interesting to see what they can make of it. But that's the tough part, too. You go into this. Bill Belichick, his son Steve on defense. You don't really know a lot. We talked to Sonny Dykes on my show, Go Look and Go Look. You can check out over on television. Sonny Dykes said they went back and looked at some of what Washington did last year, which is where Steve Belichick was the defensive coordinator. You go back and look and see what Bill Belichick did in New England when he had Cam Newton as his quarterback late in his tenure there, on what they did with a mobile quarterback. And so I really don't know. Like I would have to say TCU should win this game. But we saw across week 1 that wild card of new coaches and new places, new players and new places can cut both ways. And walking into a game where you can only game plan for so much of the unknown, going to be a fascinating challenge for Sonny Dykes and TCU as they get their season started in the Big 12. All right, let's take a look at what we expect for week 2. Some interesting matchups across the board here as far as some of the ranked matchups. Oklahoma versus Michigan. Michigan got an easy win in week 1. Bryce Underwood, their highly touted $10 million quarterback, gets his first taste of action. Brent Venables' Oklahoma defense going to be a different animal. John Mateer, the transfer from Washington State, at the helm for them. That's going to be a big one to watch. Arizona State at Mississippi State. Sam Leavitt and the Sun Devils coming back trying to defend their Big 12 title. They got an opening weekend win as well. But to go on the road in the SEC and get a big win, I think would go a long way in starting to get the hype machine going again. Cam Scadaboo sort of stole the show down the stretch. Jordan Tyson, the wide receiver for Arizona State, named to keep an eye on, preseason All-American on most lists, guy that NFL draft scouts are really excited about. And watching the games before he got injured, because he missed the college football playoff run and the Big 12 championship with injury. Incredible route runner, incredibly strong hands catcher. As someone that is playing their EA college football dynasty with Arizona State right now, he was an important part of our 2025 run there. So that one to keep an eye on. Kansas at Missouri. Obviously a ton of proximity on the line there. But Lance Leipold in Kansas, week 0 and week 1, one of the stories of the sport. Jalen Daniels, when healthy, can still be an electric college football quarterback. That's team new stadium, tons of money invested in that program, trying to show they're ready to take that next step again after a down year last year where injury at the quarterback position and a bunch of things. Defense looked good to start the season. And then this one's just kind of for fun. I don't know how many of you guys out there are familiar with what's going on at Bowling Green right now. Bowling Green, who next week will go on the road here and take on Cincinnati. The Bearcats, coming off their week 1 loss, by the way, to Nebraska. They were the Thursday night game at Arrowhead. Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift at that game. It was a great time. They lost that game to Nebraska, so they're getting ready to take on Bowling Green, who has Eddie George as its head coach, the Heisman Trophy winning running back at Ohio State. If you didn't know that, head coach at Bowling Green, they get their first win week 1. They got a team cat. Their cat named Pudge. The cat belongs to the long snapper on the team. Brought him in one point when the team was kind of down during training camp, which tends to happen. and brightened everyone's spirits. So now the Cat has a locker, the Cat has a jersey, and the Cat was held up on the sidelines like a trophy after that win. So Pudge, my current favorite underlying storyline for this college football season, they're taking on the Bearcats after a disappointing passing attack, just non-existent for Cincinnati in that week 1 loss. So we'll see what happens with them. But that's some of what to look forward to in week 2. I think the biggest one in that, probably Michigan and Oklahoma, both teams. Big prove-it years. Michigan got the sanctions hanging over their head for so long. They finally get that ruling. Sharon Moore suspended for 3 games, tons of financial penalties, but no postseason ban. And so now they've got to try and show people they can get back to that form from the national championship season. And then Oklahoma, Brent Venables, huge year there. The offensive line was young last year. The quarterback position wasn't worked out. But the defense was good enough to get them wins like that upset against Alabama. So who can put it together first with their new quarterback? John Mateers played a bunch. Bryce Underwood, incredibly talented. Very interested to see that. I'd probably lean Oklahoma right now. Want to go back and watch a little bit more Michigan before we put that one fully on wax. The AP Top 25 comes out on Tuesday. This is what I think it's going to look like. So for anyone that was unfamiliar, the rankings going into last week in the top 10 at Texas number 1, Penn State number 2, Ohio State 3, Clemson 4, Georgia 5, and then Notre Dame, Oregon, Alabama, LSU, and Miami. Obviously, in that time, Texas, Notre Dame, and Alabama all lost. I think Alabama's going to drop out of the top 10 altogether. Florida State being unranked, it's just part of that's the preseason polls fault, and it's hard in this day and age to kind of have a full measure, but Florida State was 2-10 last year. The portal can go a long way in changing that quick, and I think that's going to make more things like this happen than not. But I understand the argument for LSU at number 1. I'd bump them up to number 4 from number 9. I still think Ohio State showed enough, defending champs, looked good against a talented Texas team. And it was a big win. Texas was number 1, even if, again, preseason rankings only count for so much. Penn State holding steady at 2. I get their win against Nevada, 46-11. It wasn't some gigantic win, but I think Penn State, talent-wise, returning starter-wise, continuity-wise, that should be one of the favorites for the national championship. I have no problem keeping them at 2. I think Georgia wins the SEC this year. And so them at number 3 after an opening weekend win for them against Marshall. One of the hardest hits I've ever seen from one of their offensive line in a counterplay you've probably seen on the internet already. I would put LSU up at 4, and I think there's a lot of potential for them to be the top team in the sport. Miami rounding out the top 5. That was a great win at home against Notre Dame. Tons of resolve, built right in the trenches. Oregon at 6. And then Texas and Notre Dame, for me, Clemson, who also lost to LSU, I think will still round out the top 10 because all those were one-score games. Go Brave 39-401 LOL at my top 5. Let me know what you think the order should be. This is part prediction, part what I think could happen here, part what I would have if I was an AP voter. But I'm open to what your interpretation of this should be. Be my guest. Hit us up in the chat. Let us know. But like I said, Texas, Clemson, Notre Dame, I think all stick around. Those were one-score games. In Texas and Notre Dame's case, both on the road, and both had a chance to win it at the end of the game. So both really close. And they'll give the bump to ASU. They were just on the outside looking in at number 11. And I think it's a really good football team. Sam Leavitt, one of the best quarterbacks in the country that some people probably haven't seen enough of. We got to see some of them in the college football playoff last year. Mobile, live arm, and a great target to throw to. Kenny Dillingham and them boys in the desert got something fun working out. We'll be there week 3, I believe, for the Big 12 on TNT. So excited to get a look under the hood for that program there. So going to be a ton of fun, tons to look forward to. It was one of the more chaotic opening weekends we can remember, especially with all these ranked-on-ranked matchups here. As always, we want to hear from you guys. Thank you to everyone who's chimed in here in the chat, who watched us on YouTube, on the Bleacher Report app, reacting to everything that we saw in week 1. We're going to be back here doing this every week. So make sure you set your notifications in the BR app so it lets you know when we go live on here. You can get involved in the conversation. Again, we'll take questions. We'll react to some of the biggest headlines in the sport each and every week, give you a little peek at what's to come, talk about the sport we all love. So again, I am Mike Golick Jr. Thank you for joining us here on CFP Week 1 Overreactions on the Bleacher Report app.